This week on the podcast, we're going to talk about money that you'll need in the next 3 years. How should we be investing it? Let's get into it this week on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist, Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Phil and I. What's going on, my friend? How you doing this week?
Doing good.
Yeah?
Doing good.
We are in December, brother.
For Christmas. Oh, yeah. It feels like it, too. All of a sudden, the weather changed. It's like, what in the world happened?
Exactly. Well, I'm way down here in the south away from you, and it's chilly. It's going to be 14 degrees, I think, in tomorrow morning. So it's time for taping this.
You're getting really cold weather. So
I know, it's crazy. And unfortunately, the folks in the mountains are still dealing with all the hurricane stuff. I can't imagine how brutal it is up there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
With the temperatures and everything. But all the best to those and folks, and hopefully, they're getting stuff sorted out. I know it's going to take a long time to recover up there.
Yeah.
But hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving, enjoyed their holiday. We are into December, as we just mentioned. And Phil, I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of chat about this topic here. If we need the money in the next couple of years, right? A lot of times it tends to be kind of I think a point of confusion for people when they're looking at the market or whatever it might be, and they're thinking, okay, I need money now, I need money later, whatever. So let's go through some reasons why or how you should be invested or using your money should you need that in the next 3 years, right? So let's just run down a few things.
There's a lot of reasons that this might happen. It's kind of those big, think of it this way, as the larger planned expenses, So I need to replace the car, so you are one that doesn't lease a car, or maybe you don't want to buy it on credit. So you want to purchase your car outright every 3, 4, 5 years, whatever your timeline of your cycle is. Well, that's a pretty big expense that you have to plan for throughout the plan. So if that's coming up in the next 3 years, how should you have planned for that? Where should that money be? Or it could be a wedding. Those are pretty expensive endeavors anymore. So
especially if it's a destination wedding.
Yeah. Right? Destination wedding for sure. So where are you going to have that money if you need it, especially if it's in this shorter period of time? And there's a lot of other things. It could be, you're doing a second home and got some money set aside for a down payment that's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. You're kind of looking for one. Maybe you don't even have it picked out yet, but that's the goal. And the anticipation of the timeline is in that 2 to 3 or that short window. What do you do with that money? Christmas shopping should not be on this list. No, that's kind of your normal budget. It happens once a year. That maybe have a little Christmas savings fund or something for that if you want to throw money aside every month to help accumulate it. But yeah, we're not talking about that kind of a spending or that kind of a cash savings for some kind of a future expense. So.
Okay, so whatever the expense or the reason might be,
there's a lot of
income gaps, whatever. What are some things we should be thinking about? So when we're thinking about like our, we hear about the bucket strategy, right? Your soon money, your later money, so on and so forth. Yep. How are we looking at what's some things to think about?
So that's the first thing is you have to look at your timeline and your risk tolerance. And we get into markets like we're in now. It's tempting to say, well, I wish I would have had that in, the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ, whatever it is, I could have grown it by 30%. That's, which is really tempting, but in hindsight, that's what happens. But what happens if instead it was the opposite direction? And that's the biggest risk with this kind of money. So
is that why with like only a 3-year window, are we doing portions? Are we doing like incremental amounts or something?
Well, I would say it depends on, first of all, I would say your flexibility, so for instance, if it's the car, if you do have some flexibility in it, that, hey, I'd like to buy it in 3 years, but you're willing to wait a little bit if the market doesn't cooperate, if at that time that you were planning on buying, we're in a downturn in the market, then maybe take a little bit more risk with it so you can get a little more growth potential.
Okay.
But if it's your son or your daughter's wedding, that's something really you can't change, right? 6 months before we're in a downturn in the market, you can't tell them, well, hold on, the money's down by 20% right now, so this is not a good time. We're gonna have to wait. Not gonna happen. So if it's not flexible, the timeline, then you really should be taking a more conservative approach with it, because that piece of the market, obviously, we don't know, we can't predict, we don't control. So we can't take the risk of what happens if the market's down, that's larger, percentage, or even down 10%, So, I mean, if you're going to spend 30, $40,000 that you set aside and you've lost three, 4,000 of it, I mean, that's a pretty big hit that you, at that point, probably wouldn't want to pull it out, take the loss just to do whatever this expenditure is. So that's why having it in something more conservative for those shorter periods of time is going to make more sense.
Well, and so what's some things, again, it's not an endorsement of any particular products, but what's some things to think about? Because I mean, obviously the market is right recently, it's been doing great. And so people, you kind of get this, it lulls you into this, hey, I can pull some extra money out because it's the gains are masking, the fact that if it was down or flat, you'd be pulling out and you'd be damaging your growth potential, for further down. So what's some things to think about? Should we be thinking about like MIGAs or with CD rates being better, even though they're not real long term? I mean, what's some things to think about?
I mean, you could look at something like a CD, although right now where we're at, to get a CD rate that beats some of the high yield money market accounts, you probably have to go 3 to 5 years out, which probably doesn't
Right.
make sense.
Sure.
So a lot of times in the environment we're in right now, just a high yield savings account can get you in that 4 to 5% range, depending on where you're at. Or even looking at like the short-term government bonds. There's several different ETFs out there that are, geared towards that shorter-term bond, so it doesn't have the volatility that a longer-term bond would have as interest rates shift.
Like the normal
Like
10-year
the
bond. You
10-year
get you,
bond. I mean, you're at this point, you're probably not getting much higher of a yield to go that far
no,
out, which there's a lot more risk in that than there is a
sure.
6 month or especially like a 3 month, the T-bills. So yeah, so
Gotcha.
definitely I would say something more on the short range, just to avoid that volatility, Or I mean, if you are, like I said, do have some flexibility, you want to take a little bit more risk, maybe split it up, have some of it in a more conservative, some a little bit more aggressive. And that's really where
Gotcha.
it comes down to that risk tolerance too. What are you comfortable with?
The Tax Smart Retiree is your comprehensive guide to mastering tax efficiency for a flourishing retirement. You will find indispensable advice and actionable strategies designed to enhance tax savings, maximize Social Security benefits, protect against market volatility, and develop a customized retirement plan. To get your free ebook, click the link in the show notes of today's episode and download your copy of the Tax Smart Retiree right now.
And yeah, and ultimately that's the key, the key to any of it, right? So especially if you're thinking, okay, well, if I'm structuring out a plan, if I'm laddering out, bucketing out, whatever you want to go with, you're going to have your later monies and you're going to have your kind of mid-tier monies, and then you're going to have your sooner monies. So again, all of this is about in strategizing. So if you've got some big expenses coming up in a 2, 3, 4 year window, talk with your advisor on how to strategize and maximize, right?
But yeah, I mean, this should be, part of the overall plan to begin with. And I mean, granted, there's some of these expenses that they might be coming, but you don't necessarily know when.
Sure. I mean, if
Like the
you're going to be
wedding. I
paying
mean,
for your
that's
kids, right? If you've already
right.
made the agreement with your kid, you're going to pay for the wedding, even if they're not dating somebody, you should still be
You
planning to
should
have the
probably
money to, right? Because
right. Yeah.
when's it going to
I mean,
strike, right? I mean, next thing they're going to come to you one day and go, "Hey, I want to get married in 6 weeks," and you're like, "What?"
yeah. Well, that's one of those kind of iffy scenarios of, okay, how do I do it? So
Sure.
especially let's say they're not even dating anyone. Well,
Right.
probably can take it a little bit more aggressive at that point, because chances are you're going to have a little bit more time.
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe not. I mean, who knows? I mean, they
Who
might
knows
find the
when
right
Cupid
person
strikes, right?
and
Yeah.
yeah, get married in 6 months.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
but yeah, that you would know your child better than that, kind of know their temperament, if that's something they would do, or are they more the, hey, we've got to date for 3 years, have the long term
Right.
kind of solid foundation of knowing each other first before. But yeah, other than that, I mean, you kind of plan these things out, like the car. I mean, that's something that this is a very common with the clients that we work with. We'll plan out, well, if they're not going to lease, what is that cycle for a car purchase? And, are you wanting to buy it outright or take a loan? Some of that is a decision made at the point in time when we see what the rates are.
Yeah.
I
True.
mean, if you get to a scenario where you can buy a car and the car companies are back to giving 0%, well, why would you take it out of the bank or wherever it's at to buy a car if they're going to give it to you for free? or I mean, if it's a low interest rate, 2-3%, same thing. It's a matter of looking at what can I get the rate for a loan versus where the money's invested. But
Gotcha. Okay. And so just to kind of clarify people, when you mentioned a minute ago, T-bills, you're talking about treasury bills, right?
treasury bills, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So short-term treasuries. So
Okay. All right. Well, any other final thoughts before we wrap it up this week? So again, planning and strategizing for, again, whatever that is on the horizon, your short-term monies, your long-term monies, certainly important to talk with your advisor about. Any final thoughts as far as if you need money in a couple of years, where to look?
No, I mean that's the biggest concern I have right now, or risk that I see right now, is people getting excited with markets and what they've done, and
Sure.
being overconfident. The reality is you have to bucketize money based on risk, but also when you might need it, because you never know when we're going to run into that downturn in the market. You have to think of it anytime in a market, anytime we're above that average, you're getting kind of future returns. I always say you're borrowing returns, because at some point, that whole concept of reversion to mean, the market's going to drop to come back down. So that average comes back down to what that, mean is. So,
Well, let me run this past you real fast. A little off topic, but it works for anyway, because it's part of what we talk about here and try to help people out. I was just chatting with somebody the other day. They know what I do for a living, and we were talking, and they were like, "Oh yeah, the market's been doing so fantastic that even though our plan calls for us pulling $50,000 a year out of our retirement accounts, to offset, that they're in retirement, they've been pulling 150 because
okay.
the market's been doing so well, right?" And it's like, have you talked with your advisor about that? Have you had them rerun the numbers? Because that could put you in a real, like, that's not sustainable,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the market has lulled them. And he was giving me all these reasons why it was going to be just fine. And I thought, man, you better rerun some math and stuff, because the second we have a downturn, if you keep doing that, now you could stop
Well,
when the downturn happens and maybe you'd be okay. But if
yeah.
you kept doing it, you're like seriously damaging your long-term money.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely not recommend something like that, but
No.
kind of along that lines, I mean, if you do know that this kind of expenditure is coming down the road, you haven't set money aside in a more conservative investment, and we've had these great returns over the last year,
Mm-hmm.
2 years, now
Right.
might be a great time to pull some of those gains off the table, set them aside.
Yeah.
Now they're protected. And as we
Yeah.
go through that volatility, at least, well, this money is now set aside. It can grow at a more conservative rate going forward that we don't have to worry about. And
Yeah.
you're not at risk to what happens in the market then. So,
Well, I thought as an advisor, I thought you might be like, oh my gosh, when clients,
oh,
it's like,
there's,
hey,
yeah.
here's the strategy, and you blown it up. And that's fine if you blow it up a little bit, but 3 times the amount is a little scary.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and
be careful.
that's always the challenge of spending from that later money. I mean, it feels really good when
Sure.
you get
And
these high growth
you don't
and
feel it.
well,
You don't
right,
think like, you don't feel like you're feeling it because it's the
right,
market's been doing so great. It's kind of lulled you into this false sense of security.
right. Oh, look, I pulled the money out and it's still there. It's
And it's
actually
still
still
growing. Yeah.
growing, so I can
The
take even
principle's still
more.
there.
Yeah,
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 exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
So
You gotta do some history research on the markets and sequence of returns and understand how this works. That even if you did stop at a later point, when the market turns back down, I mean, you're
right.
probably not going to catch up at that point, because now
Yeah.
you've taken those borrowed returns out, and they're not there to help cushion that downturn in the market. So,
Exactly. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week. So we got a little off topic, but still, I think important stuff to think about.
yep,
The whole point really is strategizing, bucketizing, thinking about what it is that you need, when you need it, having short term, mid-term, long-term monies. If you
yep,
need some help, please talk with your advisor on that. Make sure you're getting some good information and education about your specific situation. You can reach out to Phil, of course, as always. You can drop us a comment in the show descriptions below there and on YouTube. Check out the show links to be able to go to get some time on Phil's calendar. Just find him online at philstaxhacks.com. That's philstaxhacks.com. Of course, all the information again in the show descriptions for this week's episode. And don't forget, subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. We'll see you next time here on Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts.
Phil? investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.